Hello there everyone, it's Carol from the Crafty Emporium. Following on from the video that I did previously, I said that I was going to have a play with my peeled paint and my wild honey for something else that's coming up in a couple of videos time, and this was what I ended up with. So again, I built up the layers. So I did a layer of green, dried it, did a little bit of the wild honey, smeared it on here, sprayed it with water, dipped my paper in it and then dried it. Then I did some more peeled paint, and so I built up the layers of it until it gave me this. Now as you know from the previous video, what I was doing was the back side of it, I was just sitting on top of the ink that was remaining whilst I was drying this top side off, and it didn't turn out quite as nice, but it is still very usable. So watch out for this in an up and coming video. Now the other thing that I did as well was, with all the inks that was left on my mat, on my glass mat, I dipped my cheesecloth into the remaining inks and then again dried it with my heat tool. That, yes, does look like a little mini hairdryer. So I just mopped up all the bits of leftover ink, and I have to say, let me see if I can do it again. For those of you that are creative embroiderers, look at that. Wouldn't that be wonderful to use in a dimensional embroidery? I might have to chop that bit off and save it for another day. So yeah, so cheesecloth, for the beginners who've never seen this stuff before, or you might have seen it before and wondering what we use it for in journals, we use it for just tucking behind bits of paper to add that little bit of extra dimension and texture to the elements that we make. So you will see this come into play again later on in the series. Now, going to the journal itself, I decided not to use all 10 of my pages in my signature because I want to add other pages and other bits and pieces like envelopes to the journal itself. I thought if I use the 10 sheets and then keep on adding more and more pages to it, it's going to really bulk out before I've even decorated it. So I've actually reduced the number of pages, and I think I put 6 in. Let me just check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so I've used 6 of the original 10. Now the 4 that are remaining I might use within here for tag backgrounds and things like that. Or I could put those aside and create another journal using those 4 pages within another journal. I'm just going to move the cover to one side a moment. One of the things that you need to think about when you're collating these together is the actual size of the pages. Now these have been cut to be the exact same size as the cover, so they will have slotted the papers in, stapled them in, folded them in half, and then a big guillotine will have chopped them off. So it means that these pages are exactly the same size as the cover. I would suggest that we're going to chop these down just a fraction so that they're just slightly smaller than the surface area of the actual front cover itself, right? And one of the ways in which you can do that is if you get an edge punch and you punch the edge of the paper, it takes, I'll show you in a sec when I've done to the bottom, it takes a little bit of the depth I'll start for this bit. So you might be able to see the underside of this, but no, let's do it that way. So this is the bit that I've not chopped off. So you can see that the edge of the scallop is actually slightly lower than the edge of the paper here. Alright, so that means then that you've made the page just fractionally shorter again. And it also gives it, obviously, a very pretty and decorative edge. Now you will need to watch with your punches, because if you've got really thin paper, it doesn't always do really thin paper, so you might have to double your pages up and put both in together for it to be able to punch. But this is thick enough that it will just take one side at a time. So I could do the same on the opposite edge as well. But let's do that. Let's just do it, Carol. And then it's done. Just means you've got to sit and watch me do this, or you could fast forward it. One of the things I haven't figured out yet with doing videos is how to fast forward like bits like this, or how to splice them together. And to be honest, I haven't got time at the minute to sit and fiddle and faff on. So with bits like this, you're just going to have to hope that I've either prepped it already or you can fast forward on yourself through the boring bits. So I do apologise for that. Okay, so I can now slot that over there. So in fact you can see, look, although these papers protrude out more than they should do, but it is now fractionally smaller than the original pages. The other format that you can take is to just rip the edge of the page, and so that it gives it a slightly document vintage look about it, because it's been ripped and because it opens up the layers of the fibres. So I don't know whether you can see on that bit, maybe. Can you see all those different layers from all the different fibres of the paper? So it opens all of that up, and then of course when you ink it up, it shows it up even more. So you could go through and go and rip the pages as well, which is what I've done to those two. This one I'm going to leave flat, square flat, and you'll see why in a bit. But I am going to cut it shorter, so I'm going to put the loose ends of the page just under the trimmer, and I'm going to take off about 1/4 of an inch. Now they don't all have to be the same size. You can make different size pages and different widths of pages, so don't feel that they've all got to be spot on and matching, because that's the joy of a junk journal. It doesn't have to be perfect. Right, so we're going to put that one in there, and I'm going to leave the middle one for the time being, because I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with that yet. I've got an idea, but I just want to think about that middle one, so I'm going to leave the middle one for now. Now when we sit our pages back in together, they won't all sit snugly up in this fold here. Alright, so they will protrude out at this end. Don't worry, when we come to stitch this signature in place, it will all make sense and it will all come together nicely. Now obviously when I ripped these, I talked about inking up the edge, and I need to ink up the edges of this paper as well, the one that I punched. Just get rid of that punch a minute. And I'm going to use my vintage photo for this one. Normally I would use my walnut stain, but for this, like I said, because I'm doing the vintage diary, the colours within that collection, they're not very strong, they're not very dark, they're not very antique looking, so I want them to be just subtle, which is why I only gently tea stained these papers. So I'm just going to place it on my glass mat and just in small circular motion I'm just going to ink up the edge of that punched area. Now you don't want really big circles when you're inking up, if you do really big ones, because you'll end up with ink on this part of the paper and you could end up ripping this punched border edge. So I'm only doing it very lightly, just skimming over the edge. So that's it before and that's it after. So it just gives it that little bit of definition. I'm going to try and line my page up again, because I've flipped it over now to do the other side, with roughly where I've inked up previously. And again, just small circular motions. Now as this ink dries, it will dry paler. So if you want something a little bit darker, and that's the same with any of the inks, it's not just this one. So if you want something a little bit darker, more defined, wait for the ink to just settle into the paper and dry off a little, and then go over it again, and you'll find that it comes up that little bit darker. Now of course the other thing that you could do is you could just leave all straight edges. You don't have to do anything with them, and you could just corner round each of the corners of the pages. You could use a fancy one and do fancy corners, but I wouldn't mix and match them so much. I would stick to either one up till there. So let's sit that around there. We just get a piece of, here's one I made earlier. So if I just use my corner rounder, then it just gives it a slightly rounded edge, makes it look that little bit more professional. Or I could use the fancy one, and these I just got from a local hobbycraft. So you could have a fancy edged one, but as I say, I wouldn't do some pages with this and some pages with that. It will start to look a little bit odd when you put them all together. Put those out of the way, but they're just further considerations for you. So if I go to my project bag, because if you remember, part of the challenge for this was to keep everything neat, tidy and organised, so we're not totally taking up all our space. And do you remember I talked about these pages here that I said would look nice folded in half and added as a page within the journal? So I'm going to use that one in this. Come on in, thank you. So I've got all my bits in there that I want to contemplate using. Now because I ripped it out of the book itself, I've got a little bit of a rough edge there, and I'm kind of thinking of leaving it, but I kind of think that I might need to do that up at this edge up here. Now you can get those rulers, and I do have one, where you place it and it pulls it off and gives you a nice jagged edge, but I didn't like it so much because it didn't quite create this kind of smoothish edge. It was a very definite zigzaggy, and then there was the very, very definite, because it had two edges to it, and that was a very, very definite zigzag. But as you can see, all I'm doing here is I'm just ripping it real slow and a little bit at a time, to just give it that slightly jagged edge. And again, I'm just going to, just a little bit of an ink, just to age it a little. A little bit more than you did there, Carol. Yeah, that's better. One little tune to yourself. Okay, I'll put that up there. I'm just going to get a wipe because I don't want this excess ink to be depositing itself on my paper. So they're quite wet, these, the tea tree oil ones. God, they're really strong smelling as well. So I'm going to use a bit of kitchen roll to just dry it off a little as well. So I'm going to fold this in half. Now again, the other thing is as well, is that you don't always have to fold it in half. You can fold it like that. But this one, I'm going to fold in half. So now we're talking about arranging our pages in a form of order so that we can get a rough idea of what our journal is going to look like. Now I've also got here another pack which has got, excuse me, some of the dyed elements in there, and I've also got this vintage piece of ledger paper, so I'm going to use those as well. Now, if I open one of these up, you can see, look, that piece of ledger paper is far bigger than the actual page of my journal. So, I'm going to put it in as it is. Let's slot it in there. Come on, shape yourself. So I'm going to slot that in there. So you can see, slightly shorter, so it's not the same height. I'm going to bring it in just a little from the edge here, so I'm going to make it shorter there. I'm going to tip those pages on there, and then I'm going to pull that round. And just lightly finger press it for now. So yeah, so that will make quite an interesting little, because it's shorter. And then on the other side, as we can see, it's too big, it's gone beyond. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to fold it round, and I'm going to fold it back on itself and make that a bit of an interesting feature so that it opens up. So that, if you imagine, I had avocado earlier. Why does avocado always get in all your nails? Keep seeing bits of green in my nails. That's not very pleasant when you're recording, is it? Ugh. Okay. So when we turn this page, oh look, an interesting bit of ledger. Turn it over. Oh look, an interesting thing that flips out. Yeah, okay. Enough of the drama. The other thing that I did was I inked up 2 envelopes and I stuck the 2 flaps together. So if I turn it over, so you can see I've got the opening here and the opening here. So it looks like that. Okay. What I'm going to do on that flat edge piece, excuse me, my breathing's not so great today, is on that flat edge piece, the one that I didn't cut, I'm going to slot that over there, and I'm going to bring that over there, so when I flip it over, I've got this piece here that we're going to do something special with, and then the envelope flaps open to reveal the pocket area, but that's now in place as well. The other thing I want to add is I did some of the graph paper, inked up some of that, so I want to slot one of those in somewhere. are we looking? So there's nothing there. Yeah, let's add it there. So I'm going to slot that in, and again I know that that's shorter than the actual pages, so I'm okay with that. And then the other thing I want to do is, this was one of the, so I used 6 of the original pages, so this page number 7, I'm actually going to rip this about a third of the way down. And I'm going to rip the top bit. Just small rips as you're going along, and then I'm going to rip down this edge down here. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to add that where that graph paper was. So I'm going to wrap that around there. And then the last thing I want to add for now is this glassine bag. Now I'm going to trim it down because the actual length of it is too long, but I can do that later. And I'm going to add that in there. Now then, normally you see most people will add the glassine bags that way, and then they will chop this bit off here so that it makes a pocket, and then obviously you've got the opening on this side to make a pocket. But I'm going to fold mine that way because some of those book pages that I'd got I said would make nice bookmarks, and I thought it'd been quite nice to have a really long pocket to pop a bookmark in. So there's a few bits and pieces I need to ink up and trim down, but I've got the basis now of the pages within my journal. Of course I can always go and add more, but by the time I've added all the pockets and the other bits, decorative bits and pieces, this will start to fill out even more. So can you remember how wide the journal was, or the book was, when we first started out? Look how it's starting to come together now. You can already see it's starting to widen up now. I'm not pushing it together. That's sort of how wide it is at the moment. So yeah, that'll do me, because one of the things that you don't want to do, you don't want to overfill it, and especially for a single signature like this, don't do too many pages because you're creating yourself an awful lot of work, and you don't want this to be so wide that it won't close properly. God, you can tell my voice is going again, can't you? Just for those of you that don't know, I'm actually asthmatic, but I've also got, I was diagnosed last year with a new thing called bronchiectasis, and it's sort of in between COPD and cystic fibrosis, and it sometimes gets my voice because it sort of it's in my throat area. So if you hear my video and my voice is a bit funny, it'll be that and I'm due a cup of tea. So next challenge is to start to organise your papers. Think about the edges of the papers and whether you want to punch them or rip them. There are other ways that we can decorate the edges of the pages as well, but I'm not going to cover that now. This is just purely from the paper point of view. So punched edges, ripped edges, just straight cut edges but slightly shorter than the actual journal cover itself, and just arrange some of your pages in the order that you think you might want to go. Of course we can change them at a later date if we don't think that they look quite right where they are. This is just to give you a bit of an idea and a feeling. Alright, I'm off for a brew, girls. Don't work too hard. See you later. Bye.